Welcome to a special edition series of the Young Athena podcast. So our podcast is actually called The Legacy. It's called Rising Leaders, which is the legacy of Young Athenas. Super powerful. So typically our normal format is to record with our Young Athenas, their stories, what they're up to now. But since one of our pillars of the Young Athena program is actually prevention, we thought it was a great idea to bring our dear friend Heidi Chance on to actually talk about the very sensitive topic of sex trafficking. So just to introduce, this topic is a little bit of a trigger warning. Some people are really uncomfortable in this topic and some people are very comfortable in this topic. So we just ask you to listen with care and understanding that this is very vulnerable information for some. But Heidi has had a very long history in working in sex trafficking and advocacy and prevention. And so we are featuring here as just a pillar of our prevention program so that we can empower young women with knowledge on what it looks like when you're being groomed for sexual exploitation, what things to look for on the internet. We are in a complete time of vulnerability due to the World Wide Web that we all love and utilize every day. So welcome, Heidi. Thank you for being here with us today. If you wouldn't mind taking a minute just to kind of introduce yourself and tell us about your history and how you ended up actually being such an advocate for this topic.
Yeah, so I am a retired Detective Heidi Chance. I retired from Phoenix Police Department. During my time there, which I spent 25 years actually with Phoenix Police Department, 14 of which was where I worked in the unit that was called the Human Exploitation and Trafficking Unit. And that is where I worked as a female undercover, which is pretty unique. When I first started with the police department, they had this unit, but it was called Vice back then. And at that time, it was limited to one female officer per squad. And it was mainly for the purpose of targeting prostitutes out on the streets of Phoenix. And fast forward to a few years before I retired, law enforcement agencies all across the country came to the realization that some of these individuals might actually be victims of trafficking and being exploited. And therefore, we need to target sex buyers and traffickers. And in order to do that, you have to have female undercovers. And so now if you looked at the unit and the ratio, there's actually more females on each squad than there are males. And so we've come a long way to, both change our perspective on this crime and how we attack it and how we work it. So it's been a ride.
Yeah, I bet. I bet. That's beautiful. And so where are you at now? You're still are you only speaking or are you still kind of attached to the cause in your career?
Yeah, so when I retired in October of 2021, I went over to Arizona Department of Gaming and I became a special agent working illegal gambling investigations. And during that time, I was very passionate still about human trafficking. And so that's where I created my own side business called actionable.com. And I have two missions with my side business. One is to continue law enforcement training. I think it's very important to specifically target female officers that might want to work undercover. When I started working as an undercover female officer, I literally had 10 minutes of a conversation and then I was put out on the street. And so recognizing how unsafe that was, training female undercovers, putting them through an actual female undercover school, going through all of the elements of establishing a crime, the conversation, how to stay safe, all of those things is the law enforcement mission, as well as education to law enforcement about investigating these types of crimes. I have several cases where I've put traffickers away for hundreds of years, and that only is successful if I submit a successful case for prosecution. And so encouraging detectives to go ahead and do that extra work to go after the trafficker, not only for a victim-based case, but also financially is a whole other thing. And so I'm training right now on going after and following the money and charging these suspects with illegal enterprise money laundering charges because of the fact that I'm only one detective in one city, in one part of the world, And I myself have had 4 traffickers that I have put in prison get out of jail or prison and then go right back to trafficking again. And that sends a clear message to me that what I did was not a good enough investigation, where I could have put them in for longer or taken all of their stuff, seizing their assets, seizing their bank accounts, their cars, their Gucci watches and Rolex watches and Gucci purses, and all of their assets. And that's where we would really affect this situation and not have traffickers hopefully return, because obviously going to prison isn't working enough. And then my other mission, long-winded answer here,
I love it.
is working community awareness. And so that's where I have developed an online course on my website. And I continue to speak nationally to community organizations, businesses, as well as law enforcement, but also with the intent to reach as many potential jurors as I can, because I have testified many times in trials where I'm hoping that the jury is picking up on the elements of this lifestyle, so that when I'm testifying that this person's a victim walking down the side of the road with a phone in their hand, that they're actually a victim and they're not free to leave. And having a jury wrap their head around that fact is super important for me, so that we can continue to get successful outcomes in these trials and hold these people accountable. So I'm on a big, huge mission to accomplish all of those things.
Yes, I love this. I worked in the human resource department at Streetlight USA, and we helped underage victims of sexual exploitation and trafficking. And this was something I worked under Leah Benson's leadership at the time. And that was one of the things she was fighting all the time, was that these women are being prosecuted as criminals. And it's like, they can't get out of this without help and involvement. And then it went to this, like, almost like the saving grace mentality where we have to save them. And it was like, we got to break the cycle first, right? They're under such deep control that it's hard for them to even see the light at the end of the tunnel. They actually truly can't see it. And they're so mentally manipulated too, that it's almost like this perfect trifecta of just exploitation over and over and over again, and control. So I love that you're on this big mission too, because this is something I've worked in for a long time. This is something I'll always support. I've seen lots of success stories, and I've seen lots of young women go back to the life because it was what they know, and it was what they were comfortable in. And it was how they were manipulated and groomed by whoever it was control they were under at the time. So thank you for doing that work, because it's so, so, so important.
Yeah.
With that, I want to ask, what do you see? I mean, other than like this juror understanding, like getting just the general community to understand that these women are victims and not criminals. What are some of the other challenges that you see that law enforcement faces in sex trafficking cases specifically? And then are there things that like the community can do to better support officers or law enforcement in these investigations? What does that look like?
Yeah, so some of the challenges for us in Arizona, when I travel around speaking, Arizona is actually doing quite well. We're just not perfect yet, but we have placements such as Streetlight and other organizations already in place for recovered juveniles as well as recovered adults, the Dream Center. They're still lacking, I would say, placement for boys, and then placement for any kids in transition. Just so that we can cover all bases of any type of victim that could be out there, where we could have a safe place for them to go. The other challenge I would say that we have is, we created this problem. Like I said, when we were initially investigating this crime, we were just arresting prostitutes and repairing relationships and getting word out there that you will be seen as a victim. We're actually trying to help you. We're asking the question we were never asking before, which is, what can I do, law enforcement? What can I do to help you get out of this situation that you're in? Asking that question now and actually providing resources and being able to give them resources, and then to believe that we're here to help them, has been absolutely a challenge. And then, like I said, again, the other challenge is traffickers returning to trafficking and exploiting victims the second they get out of jail. or prison, or they're able to continue conducting their illegal activity from within prison and jail. They have access to not only the mail, video visits, phone calls. They now have a tablet. And, even though I'm told those tablets don't have the ability to get on the internet, if a child can bypass parental controls on a phone, a hardened criminal sitting in jail for 24 hours a day can figure out how to bypass the controls that might be on these tablets. They're allowed to email. So I'm pretty sure they're able to figure out how to continue exploitation from within. And that is a huge challenge.
Yeah. And I never even considered too that there's sexual exploitation in males too, right? Because I think in the work that I did, because the group home was predominantly women, I haven't explored that much. So so you're seeing that it's kind of like, probably, is it equal? Would you say it's like an equal ratio of that, of a sexual exploitation of young males as well?
I would say it probably is. We just don't know because the
Okay.
numbers aren't showing that, because those victims are not coming forward.
Yeah.
And so what we do see is the numbers are showing that females come forward more often than male victims. So, when you Google how bad is trafficking, you're going to get numbers that are an exorbitant amount that I don't even know where these numbers are coming from, because we don't know what we don't know. We only know of the victims that we've recovered and identified, or that have called the National Human Trafficking Hotline, even if they didn't have law enforcement involvement. Those are the only identified human trafficking victims that we actually know of. The estimated number, granted, it could be as huge as projected, we just don't know. And so putting a lot of stock in what Google says is a little difficult. But there's definitely that population that is out there and that isn't as visible, and we need to bring more awareness to that population.
Yeah. Yeah, we definitely do. Beautiful. So, now that we're talking kind of about populations in general, I know, like, when I was working in human trafficking, one of the things I always heard was like, "Oh, that doesn't happen here." That doesn't happen in Arizona. And at the time I was working, it was like when our first Super Bowl happened here, and I was like, "Are you out of your mind?" I just remember sitting there going, "Look at the statistics. Like, it's going to get crazy for a little while." But I was just talking about like populations in general. Do you find it that there's always socioeconomic factors, right? But is there like race, gender, like immigration status? Do you feel like there's some populations are more vulnerable than others, or it's pretty widespread?
I get that question all the time, and I use a case study example to kind of explain that it could actually be not what you think. So most people think it's the poor kids in the poor part of town, or the kids in child welfare, or the people that are homeless out on the street. Those are the victims. But this one case that I have involves 7 victims. It was familial trafficking. It was an uncle trafficking his 13-year-old niece, as well as 5 adult females and a 17-year-old stepdaughter. And in that one case, we have one of the adult females who was in her 40s. She was a Department of Corrections officer working at the prison, lost her job, got heavily into drugs, ended up becoming a stripper at the strip club, and met the brothel owner and entered the life of prostitution in her 40s. Same case, one of the girls, 19 years old, full ride scholarship, very educated, full ride scholarship to Northern Arizona University. Her mom was a nurse. She's from Scottsdale. She meets a guy on Craigslist. He wants to take modeling pictures of her. And before you know it, she's getting introduced to the brothel owner, and her entire life, which was going one direction, is now going the other direction. And she's a resident of Perryville Prison right now. So it isn't just one demographic, like we've already discussed, male, female. It isn't just the poor kids. It isn't, just kids in general. It could be adults of any age, and of any race and socioeconomic background. So it could be anyone. That's the thing that is part of the myth that people have.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's really eye-opening, because I think that that social stigma is very much like, oh, maybe there's lack in the home. So they go out, or they have to learn to work early, and then they get caught up in, this kind of get rich quick kind of mentality. So that's pretty powerful to understand. So on this topic, now that we're understanding that like anyone can be vulnerable to the patterns or the exploitation, what are some of the early warning signs or indicators that people might miss? Because I feel like there's always signs, right? They're there. So, and how can like
Yeah.
friends, family, just people in the community better recognize and kind of prevent um, what's happening to these young people?
Yeah, so I have a whole list. I have it called my sex trafficking indicators list on my website. You just scroll down and put your information in, and I'll email it to you. And basically, like you said, if there's multiples of these that I'm going to name off, all happening at once, then the likelihood that someone might be involved in trafficking is pretty high. Um, the common one that we all know about is if someone else is holding on to a person's identity, their identification, their passport, their driver's license. Obviously, withholding that from them, that would be a huge indicator. Normal people don't have someone else holding onto their ID for them. Multiple cell phones, even if the phone has got a cracked screen and it doesn't exactly, work. If they can get on Wi-Fi, like it doesn't have service, if they can get on a Wi-Fi somewhere, like at Starbucks, then they can communicate with the trafficker and sex buyers. Um, if you've ever heard of the branding tattoo,
Mm-hmm.
just like we're watching Yellowstone, isn't it coming out tomorrow?
I think
The
so.
next
Yeah.
season. Um, yeah, I'm a big Yellowstone person, but the Duttons, they put their Y for the Yellowstone Ranch on their cows because they own those cows and they get upset when people steal their cows. And so
Right.
traffickers very similarly put their brand or their moniker name on people that they claim to own. The branding tattoos have two purposes. One, to show that ownership, and two, it goes into the part of the fraud and the coercion where victims feel a part of something, and these traffickers have spent time trying to replace family in the victim's life. And so the tattoo kind of also them being all a part of this family. That's why you'll see multiple individuals with the same or similar tattoo. As far as other indicators, hotel keys, working late hours of the night, living where you work, living out of hotels, lots of travel, not being able to communicate with your loved ones or family members without the other person around at all times, not being able to leave where you have been at and come to family events or things, or that person who they're with has to accompany them to those events at all times. Those kind of things. And like I said, I have a huge indicator list on my website.
Yeah, because I mean, we're in a world of social media now, and so I feel like that online dating kind of opens that can of worms of like where you kind of get to know each other, and there's lots of online conversation, and then it's light dating. And I feel like for a long time you didn't meet your significant other's family forever, right? And now there's a lot of people who you have been talking online for months now, and you meet in person, and it feels very natural to like take you to the next step faster. So I feel like social media and just access to people through the internet now kind of it changed the paradigm a little. I probably changed the paradigm a lot. I won't say a little. It changed the paradigm a lot because everyone's accessible now. So in the topic of social media and just access, I remember you and I had a conversation about how for a long time the average age of young women getting kind of roped into trafficking was 14. And I think you mentioned it's kind of dropping down to 12. And a lot of that is just access to young people having access to cell phones and the internet, and they're on their computers for school, and everyone has a laptop now, especially post COVID, because post COVID now a lot of the homework submissions are all on a computer, right? So can you talk to me a little bit about just social media and how you're kind of seeing that really create the big problem, because that's a big foundation of your book too, right? Is discussing that sexual exploitation is so real, and we're all vulnerable populations just because there's so many people with access to us now. So will you talk me through just the social media piece and how that influences all of this big picture?
Yeah. So part of this dynamic of human trafficking is a business. It's the supply and the demand. And the traffickers are supplying the demand, which are the sex buyers. And the sex buyers are looking for younger and younger victims. And so the traffickers are seeking out those younger victims. And if there is, and this is unfortunately a common thing, parents are giving their child a phone earlier in life, or putting them in front of an iPad to entertain them, or allowing them to get on computer games. The social media, the games, the devices, all of that opens the door into your house, into your child's bedroom, for strangers to walk right in, and you don't know who they're talking to. And so constantly when I'm out traveling around speaking about human trafficking, about how this recruitment and grooming happens, I'm telling parents about, what I'm seeing as far as the age dropping. And I'm telling them, you have to have these conversations with your child about talking to strangers. And I'm constantly saying that, and I keep getting the response back from the audience, well, how do we have those conversations? And so the how is the book, and it is called Talk to Them. And it is basically a very simple read, but it's a guide that I wrote out. And what's unique about this is I kind of mirrored it on how I would conduct, as a forensic interviewer, how I would conduct an interview with a victim. The rapport building, the timing of this conversation, and then I do put in there multiple ways to go about this conversation, as well as questions to ask to generate the back and forth, and also tips for parents to look out for. For example, if someone, and this is where having the conversation causes our child to self-police themselves, and recognize that if someone slides into their direct messages and starts asking them questions about personal information, where they go to school, how old are you, what's your last name, all of that should be concerning. They should recognize someone asking those specific questions and why, even if they're claiming to be a peer of theirs. That's not normal behavior for an 11-year-old and another 11-year-old to ask your home address or what's your cross streets. That would be an adult posing as an 11-year-old. In addition to that, if they're, this person on the other end, this stranger, is saying, hey, delete our conversation. You don't want your mom to see us talking. This is just between us. They could recognize that if you, the parent, have already talked to them about the fact that if someone comes into your messages and you start talking to them, and then they tell you to delete a conversation, that should be a red flag. Come tell me, your mom, about that conversation and what's going on. So I go in depth into all of those things. Emojis, using emojis to speak in code, so to speak, those kind of things, so that, you're telling your child this is going to happen someday. And then when it happens, they recognize it and they come talk to you. It's so important.
Yeah. So just like empowering them with information out of the get-go, right? Just understanding what that actually looks like.
Yeah.
From your experience, how does like self-esteem of a child, because I know that especially like between 10 and 15, right? There's that like trying to understand self and identity and what friends group and what works and what doesn't. And do I want to do drama club or do I want to run track? And there's all this like weird identity kind of defining happening for young women or even young men at that age. So how do you feel self-esteem plays a factor in that? Because I think we've talked about it before, but traffickers tend to prey on those who have somewhat low self-esteem. So how do you see that kind of playing out? And then how do we also build the self-worth to sort of be protective against that exploitation?
Yeah. So as far as the recruitment and grooming, traffickers are looking for vulnerabilities. So when I was talking about replacing an authority figure in someone's life, they're looking for vulnerabilities in children to replace their father or mother in their life. And they're looking on these social media profiles. And if it is where you allowed your child to have a phone and you're not monitoring it, and they create a secret Instagram that you don't know about, you have no idea who's talking to them in the profile. Also, if it's an open to the public profile, where you could have not only traffickers but sex buyers and child predators all sliding into those DMs. So the self-esteem is a huge issue, and I know it's really difficult, especially for young teens, probably even more difficult for young teen females, to build up their self-esteem. But it's something where parents just need to be present, be complimentary, be communicative, be involved in their life. And I know we have a lot going on, but this is now a different world than we had before. And we need to be involved in every aspect of who our children are associating with. The IRL acronym for in real life, the whole targeting of our kids by these social media platforms with the word friends, friend request. That is all confusing. And if it's not talked about with your child, as far as, yes, I know Facebook said friend, but that's not really someone you know in real life. And so that's not really a friend. And then setting boundaries and rules and expectations that I need to meet your friends in person. I need to meet their parents. Putting in all of those expectations, so then that way it's just a learned behavior as they grow up and go through all of these life lessons and things that happen as you grow up.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think too, there's so much. Like, I had a nanny for a while and I was guilty over it, right? Because I was like, even though she was here and she was a pillar and she was teaching them things, I still felt a little disconnected from my kids. And as their main parent, support, all of those things, I was like, okay, how do we balance this? So I was trying to get my nanny to also instill like the same morals and the same principles and the same awarenesses in my kids. But I think a lot of parents fall into that where they're like, I do have a lot going on. Like, I have a nanny because I, work full time and I'm trying to do this. And then you have sports and you have, right? Like, my daughter runs cross country. I have one in drama club. I had one in broadcast club. It was like a wild ride as a single mom of four. Now their dads are very involved. So I don't feel that, but we already have a rocky foundation to where my kids are like, okay, if I don't pay attention to this, this could be a really slippery slope really fast. So, in addition to what you talk about in your book, in really empowering parents or caregivers to like front load them with information and just really create awarenesses, it's kind of a fine line between like giving autonomy, right? Like, because we want our kids to grow. Like, that was one of the things that I was recognizing. Like, my son's about to turn 17 and I'm like, you're going to get a job and you're going to drive yourself to your job. And like, I want you to have autonomy. So what are other like resources or things that parents and caregivers can do other than your book to empower these kids to just create that awareness that it's literally everywhere and you can be a victim anywhere? So what are some of the other things that they can do to sort of address that?
Yeah, lots of things. As far as documentaries, even, there is a movie called Wake Up, the official movie Wake Up. They have an Instagram. I like this movie. I saw it on a Delta flight, actually, which was really cool that they had that on their list of movies available. And it's a really good depiction of how a trafficker groomed two girls at the same time. One was in the child welfare system, one was a better off family involved, but had an open profile on social media, and he was able to swoop in on her DMs. And the outcome of all of what happened with that. I talked to the director. I don't like one part of the movie where they depict a police officer as a trafficker. And I did ask her, why are we putting that in? That's not helpful for law enforcement.
No, not even
But
a
she said
little.
it's based on true stories. So, yeah. So she let it go into the movie. But the movie is a good depiction of not only that recruitment and grooming dynamic with the two examples of those two girls, but also the sex buyer and how that happens, and how this sex buyer moved to real life situations from an obsession with pornography, where he would lock himself in the bedroom and watch pornography, and then that graduated to calling a girl for a date. And then he got caught. His wife found out. attempted suicide, all of the realities that could actually happen with the situation of a sex buyer. So educating them, I mean, that's a pretty heavy movie for a younger kid. But parents definitely need to educate themselves. It is the job of a parent now to look into all these new apps. There's new apps every year. There's apps that are suggested by the school. The two companies that I suggest to kind of follow up and educate yourselves, in addition to my website and things that I put out there, is Bark Technologies and Gab Wireless. And both of those companies not only have devices that are phones and smartwatches that don't have access to the internet at all, or have heavily programmed parental controls. In addition to that, they have blogs, and on those blogs, they're putting out current information on all these new apps and rating them as far as how dangerous they are and how easy it is for a predator to engage with your child on these apps. And I think that constant education about this is something that parents can do, and then they can show examples of it to their child on these websites.
Yeah. Okay, beautiful. I love that. And I think in one of your other presentations, I had taken some notes on those as well. Because as you know, like I just said, I'm a single mom of 4. I have 2 boys and 2 girls. And that's one of the things we've always talked about is exploitation through phone, inappropriate conversations. And I do try to be very vocal and like tell my kids what's right and wrong. But then at the same time, like anyone can have a bad day and be vulnerable, right? And so giving them the information to make sure that I don't have to hurt anybody later is always what I'm going for. But so that being said, we're dealing with a little bit of different populations here, right? Because you have the young teens, the 12 to 15, still in high school, in that like identity crisis, and then we have like the high school age moving into college, and then adults. So navigating those conversations between all of those populations, I think that the messaging is the same, but then it's almost like what messages are most effective at each stage, because a lot of it when they're young is like kind of scary, like it's almost like scaring them a little because they're like, oh my gosh, I'm vulnerable and all of that. But it's not really a scare tactic. It's almost like, let me empower you with what's really, really going on in the world so we can prevent it. So do you find that there's messaging that works in specific populations, or do you just kind of frame it all the same and, speak to everyone about human trafficking in the same way?
Well, I think that parents definitely need to spend time with the younger children in their lives, whether they're a caregiver or a foster parent or actual parent, about good touch, bad touch, what body parts are named, not giving them nicknames, because nicknames are going to confuse things when they're trying to report something as a 5-year-old that something happened. And so that isn't what is in my book, but that is a conversation, obviously, at that level that needs to start happening. And then graduating into, when you are leading up to this decision to give your child a device or a phone that you can't monitor 24/7, one, find them a device that is either a Bark phone or a Gab phone, so then that way it doesn't have the internet at all. And then when they've been responsible with that device, graduate to a device where they can get in the internet, but has the parental controls. I think those 3 levels are from, kindergarten, preschool, all the way to high school. And I know it's hard with high school students, but it's one of those things where the conversations almost are even more concerning, that you have to talk to them about all of these elements of strangers coming into their lives through different means, like the games and the devices and the social media and the apps. And those are, continual conversations all throughout growing up, so that it's a learned expectation that, I have to be safe. I have to second guess when someone starts private messaging me. I have to second guess when someone sends me a friend request, and know that I don't know this person in real life. I can't share personal information with them. I need to protect some of those things. Images on the phone. If you are taking pictures, and that's another thing I address in my book, is sextortion, because that's huge. that no photo that you take and post online will ever go away. Even though we have the Take It Down program from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, we don't know that it wasn't screenshotted and sent through text, and there's no way to get that off the internet or keep it safe or delete it. So the best advice is just not to take those images in the first place. And that is a huge conversation that parents need to have, because there are literally people in other countries trying to engage with our kids and get them to send an inappropriate image so they can extort them. And we have kids sending these images, and then those people threaten to blast it all over the internet unless you give me $5,000. Now, what 14-year-old has $5,000 laying around and they're committing suicide over this? And they're not open with their parent, and they're not telling them what's happening, and it's very, very scary. And so all of that could have been possibly prevented with conversations in advance that this could happen, and that has to be talked about to prevent it.
Yeah, because I think it's very simple too. And AI is not helping in any of this, right? Because now you have AI generated images with your face on it or your child's face on it. And then there's the like, what's real, what's not real, that kind of experience. Because I know that we were just having a conversation with one of my friends, got one of those scam calls where they were like used the voice of their child from a video through an AI app to, try to exploit them for money. So I think that the sexploitation is going to be the next thing, right? Because you can AI generate very inappropriate photos with pretty much anybody's face on it. If I said, give me an inappropriate photo of Taylor Swift, like AI is going to crank that out and voila. And we don't know what's real and what's not real. So just don't do it. And then speaking to that though, parents post a lot about their kids, right? Like there's a lot of parents who are like super proud, and I'm one of those, right? Like I love my kids and I'm super proud. My daughter plays club volleyball, and so I was posting about her volleyball games, and then I like went through your class and I was like, I don't know if I'm as excited about posting my kids online anymore, because anybody can take any of those photos and we are in that AI scheme. So in your experience, I mean, you mentioned it, I think, in one of the other classes of yours that I took, where you just like don't post your kids online. So can you speak to that a little bit about the risk factors of posting pictures of your kids online?
Yeah, I mean, it is unfortunately how it has to be, because you can have, a couple of pictures on your personal website, and whether or not it's open to the public or not. I had a personal Instagram that got hacked, and I got locked out of it, and I had no longer access to my own personal Instagram. So you never know if you're going to get hacked and something like that could happen. And then what do they do with those pictures that you thought, because my profile is not open to the public, it's private, that nothing can happen, and it can. So be careful what you post. Be careful what's in the background of your photos. Like even right now, if I wanted to, I could zoom in on your certificates behind you and see where you went to school. If I wanted to creep on, where you live, and I didn't know that you're based in Arizona. So
Right.
just be careful of, in the background, your numbers to your house or license plates on cars. If you have your kids standing in front of the house on the first day of school, I know we like to show those comparison photos, but maybe it's something that you keep in a private photo album digitally that
Mhm.
that you only share, with family. They have those new picture frames out where you can share digitally new pictures you take on like a one of those digital photo frames. It doesn't go on the internet anywhere. It's just in your house. Maybe get one of those frames if you want to send pictures to family members.
Yeah. I know. I keep thinking about that because I'm like, I always do like the blast for like happy birthdays. And then I just find myself every time I'm like, oh, now that I'm empowered with the information, it's like, know better, do better. Right. And so I've been like trying to break that pattern too of like, and mine are public because I do a lot of public speaking. I do a lot of public, just information. I do podcasting. Right. And if my page is private, then guess what? I can't share that with the masses. I can't share it on the TikToks. I can't share it across all of my like my open face. So it's definitely been a journey for that. Because I'm like, okay, now that I know better, do better, I need to definitely figure out how to navigate all of this, where being public facing, just like you are, of like out sharing about prevention and community and all of these things, but then also keeping my kids safe, because the more I'm out there, the more vulnerable that they get on the backside of that. So that's, it's definitely been something that I'm like so thankful for you, because I'm like, these are things I never would have thought of had I not been sitting, like going through your class, reading your book, and then being like, oh, okay, this is real. Like I need to get my crap together and figure it out. So
Imagine
I'm
being a
just,
cop's kid.
yeah.
Yeah,
You were a cops kid? Your dad was your dad or mom?
I am, and then my son. So yeah,
Oh.
my
yeah,
son wasn't allowed to have social media.
yeah.
Yeah, he's in his
Yeah,
20s now, but uh, all of those things.
the amount of lockdown, right? Where you're just like, nope, that's a hard no. Yeah, I bet. Yeah, and then I mean, being in law enforcement too, you're already a vulnerable, I won't say a vulnerable population, but people target you, right? So then the more you're out there on social media, the easier it is to be targeted, right? My uncle has been in law enforcement forever. I have cousins that do too, and I
Yeah,
like never even thought like, oh, if you like go to trial against somebody, like they have a chip on their shoulder for you, and now the more access they can figure out where you are, the more vulnerable you become as law enforcement too, right?
yeah. So there are companies out there like officerprivacy.com or deleteme.com. And Delete Me, I have a discount code, a chance for awareness. But basically, it's a monthly service because these is it data brokers that buy and sell your information. Every month they get a new batch of information, or it's a new entity, and there's like 750 different data broker companies out there, estimated. And so every month, you could go through the whole process of taking yourself off Google, taking yourself off of Bing and all of the other websites, or you could pay for the service. And I think it's a great idea for everybody to protect yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of want to dig into your personal story a little bit, because you were a detective for City of Phoenix. You mentioned that. And then did you already have a passion for human trafficking, or like, can I talk to me about that journey? And then now that you are like heavily rooted, what continues to drive you on this mission to just notify and just be within the cause?
Yeah, so when I first started with Phoenix Police Department, I worked patrol in Maryville Precinct, which is West Phoenix, and I had my son, and so it's not easy to be a female officer with a baby.
Yeah.
Not easy at all. And so I went ahead and switched my squad to a school resource officer position so that I could have normal hours, with weekends off, to be able to take care of my child.
Mm.
So while I spent time there at the school, I think I blinked and 6 years went by at the same school. And I remember, I knew these kids. I had rapport with them. I was the officer at the school. I'm kind of highly identifiable, being the little blonde here. And I was in my mid 20s, mid to early 20s. Anyway, I can't take the police car home, and so I would drop the keys off in the precinct and go home in my vehicle. And so one day I was taking the keys inside, and I passed this area of the precinct where we detain juveniles that are either being interviewed as a victim, or are in trouble themselves. And it's two rooms to keep them away from adults that are going to jail and are getting booked into the jail. So I passed the juvenile holding area, and I kind of double taked and saw this little girl that I knew when she was a seventh or eighth grader at that school. And she was, this was only a couple years later. She was still under 18. She was probably about 16, almost 17. And, I peeked my head in and I said, "Hey, why are you in trouble?" And, that's when she pretty much told me that she was under arrest. And this was a long time ago, when we did have, the policies to book juveniles for prostitution, and she was under arrest for prostitution. And I was just mind blown that this is happening to our kids. And so that's kind of what sparked my interest in doing temporary assignments with the vice unit, is what it was called back then. And that's when it only had the one female position. And they would just borrow girls from patrol anytime that they decided to do an operation targeting sex buyers, but that was very rare. And so, that's what got me interested in doing this. And then my passion has continued on and grown as I've grown as a detective and learning the ins and outs of this whole crime. And then, having success with some trials that truly got evil individuals off the street and not able to exploit anyone else because they have a life sentence, essentially hundreds of years in jail. That one case that I talked about with the 7 victims, that went to trial for 7 months. And the outcome of that, he was found guilty on 101 out of 105 counts of sex misconduct with a minor, sex trafficking, aggravated assault, all of the things. And he was sentenced to 493.5 years in prison. And that's a record for the United States. So that's kind of what keeps me going, is getting outcomes like that and inspiring other detectives to see that that's possible in your investigations. And now expanding on that, going after the money and really seizing their assets and taking them out at the knees so they can't do this again.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's so important. That's wow. So you said 493 years?
493.5. Yeah.
0.5. Yeah. That's powerful though. But when you stack all those charges, great. Yeah, spend your 493.5 years in prison, please. Yeah. So
Yeah.
on average, what do you see? Like if there was only a few counts, or maybe somebody who hasn't been in that long, or there wasn't enough evidence stacked against them, do you see that there's an average age, or is it a pretty wide variety of you have people who get 10 years and then you have your 100 years, or what does that kind of look like? Because I know you were saying that some of them get out of jail pretty quick, right? Like you were saying that they get out of jail or prison and then they jump back right into the life of human trafficking again. So what do you see that kind of on average?
Yeah. So just to compare, back when I first started in the human trafficking unit, these were traffickers trafficking kids the same as they are today. Not a lot's changed. They were getting plea offers for 9 or 10 years. I had one get 5 years for trafficking a juvenile. And that's why the Proposition 313 that just passed is so important to me, because I have, like I said, had 4 traffickers now that I have had to put back in jail, and they were trafficking kids. And so life sentences is what they need to know is the outcome of trafficking a child in Arizona. And so that's what's really important to me, as far as really not only a deterrent, but taking truly evil people that would exploit a child off the streets for the rest of their life.
Yeah. So understanding that, you've been in this work for years now, right? This is really what seems like your life's mission. But talking about sexploitation, and then talking about the human trafficking pieces, it's kind of a tough conversation, right? Like these are pretty heavy topics to share. And I know you've been around it a long time, but how do you kind of navigate the emotional toll that it happens? I know being an officer for a while, you kind of have to do the fact and emotion separation to, get the facts and get the case together. But as a woman, especially, I feel like we're definitely, I wouldn't say more emotional, because I think that sounds really cliche, but we definitely have a heart for things. And so how do you sort of navigate the emotions piece? And what advice would you give someone that's in a similar role or out there trying to make a difference in this space, to not get overwhelmed in that emotional piece of it?
Yeah, well, my experience has been where it's just now coming to light that law enforcement and what we're exposed to needs to be dealt with, not just when you get in a shooting incident, but you need to have the counseling and, the mental health assistance all throughout your career. Even in instances where I'm interviewing a victim that's describing some awful thing that happened to them, and they're crying and I'm crying, and all of those things. And that really wasn't available to me during the time that I was at Phoenix Police Department. Not because I couldn't call my own counselor, but the whole mental health for law enforcement wasn't a movement that was um, as it is today and as it is now. And so to cope myself, I dive into all these things. I mean, I wrote a book, I've got my own business, I'm still full-time law enforcement, I'm a speaker nationally. I've just dived in, and I think, not giving myself a moment's rest to think about all of those things is unfortunately how I've chosen to handle it. Um, I feel I feel that giving victims justice and doing the best job that I can really satisfies me, and that's also getting that satisfaction helps me cope with all of the things that I've been exposed to and experienced.
Yeah, I could see that though, because if you're witnessing that like tumultuous, like the really awful experiences, but on this side you're able to make a difference in that very same space, I could see how that would sort of provide balance in the overall experience of being really tied to this cause. So for those who are listening and who are out here and would want to help, what are some impactful ways that they can contribute to either awareness or, making noise in a community or being an informed juror? I know we've covered a few of them on here, but what are some impactful ways that you think people can contribute to ending trafficking or ending sexploitation or really just making a difference in the cause overall?
Yeah, so obviously I would start with educating yourself as much as possible about what human trafficking is, and I know we've talked a lot about some of what that is. I have an online class that I created on my website just for that purpose. It's called The Power of Awareness. But in addition to that, getting involved in organizations in your community, whether it's volunteering or actually working there like you did at Streetlight. I also have a couple of organizations that want to get involved so much that they are collecting donations. Because when I was at my last agency, I had in my car, in my trunk, several backpacks full of toiletries, of hoodies and flip-flops and leggings of different sizes, so like small, medium, large, a backpack of all small, those kind of things. Because when I'm sitting across the table from a victim and I'm trying to interview them, they're worried about their property back at the hotel room that the pimp allowed them to own themselves. They're worried about their hygiene stuff. They're worried about their, makeup. They're worried about their shoes. And if I could, while we're rescuing them, offer them a backpack full of property that somewhat replaces those things for them, that goes a long way to not only build rapport between me, the investigator, and that victim, but also, gives them an opportunity to get out of the clothes that they've been wearing, that they've worn all night long. I mean, a lot of times they've got a phone, they've got a wig on, they got high heels and a mini dress, no undergarments. That's it. And so being able to give them those kind of things, I think is huge, as far as, what a community group could do. And then individuals, obviously voting on these initiatives that are coming across. To put it in perspective, right now in Phoenix, if a buyer uh, solicits me as an undercover for sex, they go to jail. We tow their car, but they could be arrested 15 times and they just get a little bit more time in jail. To equate that to if I arrest a prostitute, her fourth conviction in a 5-year period is a felony, and she'll have a felony on her record and could go to prison. It's not equal at all. And so we need to try and legislate for stricter punishments for buyers. That's another thing that obviously could be done. And then, of course, the gap in placement for boys, or even more homes that we could open up to be a facility for survivors that are escaping the life, both adult and juvenile. Those are all things that I would say we need.
Yeah, I would agree. And we are with Cece's Hope Center too. That's another foundation under Leah Benson's leadership that we support as well. Dr. Readers is on the board for them. So definitely a cause that's near and dear to our heart. And then just there's so many girls that were in Streetlight at the time that I was there. And now we have like online Facebook groups for support, for them to reach out if they need anything. So we've definitely tried to empower them with community, even in the distance world, where it's like, there's so many of us in the group that if any of the girls were like, I am stuck here, can you come get me? We're like, absolutely. There's so many of us that worked at Streetlight that are in the group, even contributing to them in that way, because we were their safe space when they were in the group home, right? And so just being able to have that rapport still where they trust, where they can reach out when things get hard, that's powerful as well. Just being an advocate for them. A lot of those girls had never been fought for before they got to Streetlight, and we wanted to teach them how to go to school and to really like integrate in society and have a good mentor that teaches you life skills and things that will skill you up for your future. And why do you want to be successful at school, and just really trying to instill good life morals into the young women that had came from. Some of them, you were right, there was family exploitation in that, right? There was family trafficking, generations of it in some of those young women. And so I think it was eye-opening for me to recognize that it's not always the outside world that gets our kids either. Sometimes some of that is familial, and being highly aware. I can't even tell you how many times that I heard some of the girls say that they reported it to their cousin, and everyone was like, you're crazy. Our uncle would never do that to anyone. And it's like, then they just were like, oh, okay, I guess I am crazy, right? And then they start labeling themselves. So it's definitely everywhere. I say that over and over again because I get that so much, where people are like, oh, trafficking doesn't happen here. And I'm like, no, yes, it does. It happens everywhere. Like, I've personally witnessed this. So if that's one thing I could just say over and over again, is it's everywhere. Anywhere there's technology, it's there. Anywhere there's people, it's there. I remember when we were actually gearing up for the first Super Bowl here, and it was like like we were expecting trafficking to be up over like 240% at the time, just because there's people are traveling, there's lots of sex buyers. Like it was a wild time, and I don't think I realized in big event centered communities throughout the nation that that's a thing that is very frequent there, because there's so many buyers in the market in those highly populated convention areas. So I feel like we could talk about this all night because we're both really passionate about it. But I know for the sake of time, I want to be respectful. So thank you. So one last question. Are there any upcoming initiatives? I know you just said Prop 313 actually got passed, so we're headed there. But are there any upcoming initiatives or movements that give you like optimism for the future, or even just ways that you think like people could start supporting? Or I mean, the backpack thing is huge, but anything outside of that would be helpful, or that you just see that you're totally optimistic for the direction on which everything's going.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the name of the initiative is, but obviously pursuing stricter punishments for buyers is on the way. And then, the other initiatives as far as awareness, just sharing information, sharing things that I put out there, or that other organizations like Streetlight, or the Dream Center. I think they're renaming it Hope, or Where Hope Lives. Is that what
I think so.
that's what they're naming it, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just sharing things that they're, putting out there. And then there's other organizations like Fight the New Drug, Exodus Road, a lot of anti-human trafficking resources and organizations that just help get the word out there so that it's in people's minds. And, that's truly what's going to help this situation is stricter punishments, and people talking about it and being aware of it, and talking to others about it. So that's what I would encourage.
Love that. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been such a powerful conversation. And part of the work we do in the Young Athena program is really just rooting young women in themselves, really giving them any information we can on how to navigate their futures. Because a lot of our girls, we opened it up to high school this year. So we now have young Athenas that have been 13 all the way through their late 20s. That's been really powerful to do. But I don't think there's enough like we could empower them with information today, and only some of it will stick, and then we empower them tomorrow, and then maybe some more will. So I just so appreciate you being welcome or being willing to jump on here with me and just have this conversation as a form of prevention and just really empowering them with information. So and resources, true. Like if you find yourself caught up in this situation, what do you do and how do you navigate it? So definitely give Heidi a follow. She's and what's your Instagram, Heidi?
A_chance_for_awareness.
Okay, a chance for awareness. Okay, all underscores under there. So yeah, give Heidi a follow. Follow what she's doing. If you want to get involved in any causes surrounding human trafficking, definitely reach out to us. We have lots of resources. We can connect you with Heidi. But what a powerful conversation. And just thank you so much for your time and expertise and being so willing to have this conversation with us today.
You are so welcome. Thank you.